Skip Morton Center.
Oh, yes.
He was a pharmacist and one of the few entrepreneurs around town. His first place was right down the street here on the corner of Lyons and Darrell. And what was important about it is that we used to hang out there. The kids used to hang out on the steps. We'll go by there.
At his pharmacy.
Yeah. But he moved over here. And he had a drugstore here.
And when you used to hang out there, was it to get sodas and...
Yeah, just to sit and talk. The bad kids were the ones that smoked cigarettes. Seriously.
Yeah. Were you one of those?
No, I didn't smoke cigarettes. I was a big-time athlete.
Right.
And only drank. I didn't smoke. But I didn't do that during the football season. Anyway, this was the borderline. Black folks live on this side. The first guy to move on the other side of Church Street was Doc Morrison. He bought a house on over there on the other side of the high school, and that sort of broke the barrier. Can't remember what year it was, but
so Doc Morrison broke the barrier.
Yeah, William Morrison. I'm a little vague about when black folks moved north of Church Street down here, but if I can recall correctly, there were no blacks on this side of the street that were on this side of the street. It was just that defined. And if you follow the Fifth Ward original lines really confined the black community, defined the black community. So this was the eastern edge of the black community, the McCormick Boulevard. And, when we were kids, canal banks didn't have trees then, so we used to put on the canal banks. We were big at stealing apples and things like that. There was a guy further down this road here that had an apple tree, great, 2 or 3 of them. So we used to, raid his orchard.
And this is you would come into the white side of Evanston to do that.
Yeah, this is the
border,
the canal bank. And the canal, and we would go across the street. I'm not sure, but the belief was that they would shoot at us. And in fact, I do believe, but I just can't remember exactly. So we would run, when we see the guy, we'd run across the street and dive over the canal.
And was it a scary thing to cross over McCormick into the side of Evanston?
Well, it wasn't scary, but it was kind of bravado, daring. Yeah. This is where this area he used to have his orchard. Now, the houses, one of my best friends lived in these houses that they picked up and moved into the black community. Kingley School, and now the west side of Kingley School was the side of the houses. I'll show you in a minute.
And who was this best friend?
A guy named Gaylord Mance, M-A-N-C-E. His cousin was Julian Mance, Junior Mance, who became a very famous jazz pianist. Worked with Ella Fitzgerald and Dizzy Gillespie, Gene Ammons, you name it. He has dementia now, but he's still around.
In Evanston?
In New York. Gaylord's father, Stonewall Jackson Mance, was the leader of the Masons, and the Masons built the Masonic Temple. You know where that is?
Yeah.
That was built by blacks.
His name was Stonewall Jackson Mance?
And this is where the houses were. About 3 or 4, I don't remember exactly. They were right here on the corner. And they just picked them up and took them across Bennett, literally.
How do you know that?
Well, I saw them.
And what did you see?
Houses on rollers, and they were being pulled down the street.
And what year was that about?
I don't remember. I would guess when I was around 10, 11, 12 years old, something like that, because I think I was going to Haven when it happened. It had to be 1940, 41, 40, something like that.
And why do you think they moved the houses from...
And they want black folks living on them.
So there were black folks living in these houses on Haven, and they moved into the Fifth Ward to get them out of the white area.
Absolutely. Whites on that side, blacks over here. up here on the corner where the church is, and it's across from Foster Field. And that Foster Field was the center of the black community because that's where the all-black school was. That's where we did our recreational stuff. We played football. That's what we did back then. We were athletes. If you didn't drink, I mean, we drank, I didn't mean that. But nobody did drugs or kill each other. We would have fights. But athletics, basketball team, baseball team, football team, that's what we did. Fleetwood-Jourdain. They don't service people anymore. I mean, we could go there almost any time of night up until 9 or 10 o'clock. And, that was it. Everybody was there. There was a guy named Charles Booyer who was a PE teacher at Foster School. He was instrumental in keeping kids involved in athletics. A guy named Jack Brackett, who was, I think he had cerebral palsy, a little short guy. He was a real organizer of the kids, young kids. He would make them do things, structured kind of play. And those were some of the reasons why we didn't. I mean, we drank. I can count the guys. I named the guys who got involved in drugs. About 3 or 4 of them. And there were some guys that smoked marijuana. Not a lot. It just wasn't. Nobody did it. It wasn't the thing to do. Now, again, this is the black community over here. This was kind of a commercial area. They had 3 pool rooms here. One over here where the gas station is. One down on the corner. And the other interesting thing is that there were no Jews in Evanston. So down on the corner by the Masonic Temple, in fact, in the Masonic Temple, was Stein and Glickman. They were the tailors, and everybody bought their zoot suits or anything from Stein and Glick. I mean, they really did. There were a couple of offshoots from the black community. One on Emerson Street where the Ebenezer Church is, and across the street was the Black YMCA, the Emerson Street YMCA. But anyway, right next to it, the Y was Henry Butler. You ever heard about Henry Butler?
Yes, but I'm not remembering who he is.
Henry Butler was one of the richest guys in Evanston. I didn't say black guys, richest guys in Evanston. All right, and the way the story went is that in Chicago Fire, he was living in Passaic. His father was white, mother black. He was in Passaic, Wisconsin. Chicago Fire came. His father went to see the damage of the fire. Drove to Evanston, liked it, and moved his whole family to Evanston. Henry Butler, as a young guy, worked for a wealthy family as a footman. He got, and I'm not clear how he got involved, but he started a livery service. And he became the largest livery service on the North Shore. And again, one of the wealthiest men in Evanston. Then he went into...
and he was a black guy.
Yeah. He went into trucks. And again, had one of the largest livery services, cartage service on the North Shore. So right across from Ebenezer Church, he built, next to the YMCA, he built, not a warehouse exactly, but where he stored the trucks and that sort of stuff. The story goes, he decided he wanted to build his dream house. And so he bought some land immediately east of Dempster. He was going to build his dream house. But they wouldn't do site development. They didn't want a black living on it. And the lagoon, they did a landfill, put the lagoon, moved them further away from the lake. So he said, okay. So instead of moving there, he built 3 walk-ups and moved black families into these walk-ups. So instead of one
black, that's great.
Small community.
That's great.
So Ebenezer was one of the first churches here. The Butler buildings were where the buildings here. That's where the Butler buildings. Blacks lived in this area, all down this street. And the Emerson Y was right here too. Another Jewish guy was on the corner here, but he had a store there. And he was the one who made me aware of the fact that Jews couldn't live in Evanston.
So they would have a store in Evanston, but they didn't live in Evanston?
Oh, yeah. There was one Jewish family lived in Evanston. and that was a guy named Greenberg. And the only reason he moved here was because he was the architect for one of the architects for Perkins and Will that built the high school. Now this was a black community. Leon Robinson lived in one of these houses. I can't remember which one. His family, rather. So this one street, Garnett Place, was a black community during that period, and integration was anathema, for want of a better word. That was the last thing in the world anybody would think of doing until we started marching.
And where did you live? Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up on Dodge Avenue, in 1930 Dodge. And that's where we first moved. That was my great aunt's house. And I grew up with my 5 cousins and boys. And then my great aunt's sons, Bryson was the name, my 2 sisters, and my grandmother, who worked for a wealthy family in Winnetka, spent a week in Winnetka and would come down for the weekend. My uncle, who was a World War I veteran, who was eccentric. In fact, what he did is that you see these Hispanic guys driving these trucks, picking up junk in the alley. He didn't have a truck; he had a hand cart, and he'd pick up rags and iron and so forth and paper and sell them to the guy. And then every weekend he'd go downtown and drink and come back home. But the other thing that was fascinating is that he talked to himself. So, now you see people talk to themselves, but they're on the phone. But then he would talk, he had a phone right to God. This is my great uncle, right? Uncle Lucian.
Lucian.
Yeah. My father, Elizabeth Hill's father, you heard of Dr. Hill, right?
Yes.
Her father was a friend of my father. Our father worked for Patton. Patton was one of the guys that started in the steel. That's why they got Patton Gym over here. It's named after him.
Wow.
And my Mr. Hill, he told my father about a job with a guy named Bridges, who's one of the managers for Inland Steel. So we moved over at 570 Millburn. And when I was around 7, I was in 2nd grade. I went to 2nd grade. We had a house, 20 plus rooms. We lived in a coach house. 4-car garage, 7-room coach house. We had a greenhouse east of the coach house, private beach, a garden, big old garden.
And who was the guy who lived in this house?
George Bridges was.
George Bridges, right.
Was the name of the guy.
Did he have a family and children? And
yeah, I don't remember their names or anything, but yes, he did.
And you were living there because your dad worked
as a chauffeur, gardener, handyman. He did it all. He was quite a guy. High mechanical aptitude.
And what did your mom do?
She was the manager of a grocery store, Watkins grocery store. The value to me was that it made me realize there was no big deal having a big house. So I never wanted to worry about, can I get a big house? I knew what a big house was.
Right.
And the other thing too was I realized that living large wasn't all that cut out to me.
Right. Was it strange that you, as a black family, was living on Melbourne?
Oh, more than strange. It was unheard of. And the problem was, we were supposed to go to Orrington School. And we lived in back of the waterworks. There's a reservoir there now.
So you were saying that you were supposed to go to Orrington?
Yeah, let me show you what Orrington is. I'll show you what they did to us. Which was a 7-year-old kid, I guess it was. Made a huge difference in my entire life. This is walking to Orrington School, right?
Yeah.
Now, we turn 1 block this way. Of course, this is white neighborhood, let's say.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So here's the school, right?
Okay.
Orrington School.
Yeah.
3 blocks, right?
Got it.
All right. They wouldn't let us go there. We had to go to Noe School. My father tried to enroll us. They turned him down. But Mr. Bridges tried also. And they turned him down.
Wow.
And at that time, there were no expressways. So Sheridan Road and Sherman were heavily traveled streets. So instead of going to Orrington, a 3-block walk, he had to go to Noyes School. And Noyes was integrated across.
Noyes was integrated?
Yeah. So we started here, right?
Okay, yeah.
And we'd have to walk, we have to cross the street. In fact, my youngest sister, she wasn't run over by a car, she ran into a car. she was always kind of her own person. So she wouldn't keep up with my sister was older than I. And so when we crossed the street, she ran to catch us and ran into this car. Scared the poor woman driver to death. So we had to walk past the tennis courts. I hope I can get through.
So yeah, you're walking.
Yeah.
And what was here at the time?
Same thing.
No, these buildings.
And tennis courts on that side. And this is where Pat and Jim used to be here. And now it's the...
And why couldn't you go to Orrington if Noyes was integrated? There were certain schools that were integrated. Foster was all black. Noyes was integrated, and then Orrington was only white.
Yeah, and Dewey was
integrated.
Yeah. And that was it. Oh, I'm sorry. The two junior schools, Nichols and Haven, only they didn't have shoot school then. Nichols and Haven were integrated. And of course the high school, everybody went to the same high school.
And so when your dad told you guys that you couldn't go to Orrington, what did it mean to you? What did you think about?
The first thing, we would be walking to Noyes, and we passed white kids going to Orrington. So my first thought, if I was white, I wouldn't have to do this. And then I began to think, I said, no. We got Joe Lewis, we got Marion Anderson, we got Paul Rosen. They don't know who we are. And I'm going to teach them who we are. I've been doing it ever since.
Is that really, that's when it started?
That's when it started, right?
You reacted to it in an empowering way rather than a defeatist way.
That's right, instead of being depressed, on the contrary.
Were you angry?
Oh man, yeah, I was angry. I played football, so that took out a lot of my aggression. And but athlete, so that's a real outlet. Now we are getting near Noyes too.
So how long would it take you guys to walk? You were young.
I don't remember.
I mean, this is far. I didn't realize this was a school.
Had a great principal too. He was a really extraordinary guy.
In what way?
Oh, he, field trips were unheard of then. He would take us on field trips.
Oh, wow.
He would make sure that we were integrated. He didn't cater to the black kids, but he made sure that we were involved as, you heard of crossing guards, right?
Yeah.
Back then they had junior cops. The kids who would have these white belts, and they would help the other kids across the street. And he took us to the Field Museum, the Museum of Science and Industry,
wow.
to the stockyards. He was really a great guy. Phil Jacobson. So we're still in the white neighborhood, so be careful. And most of my friends lived over here in the black community. So they didn't have the same experience that I had.
And so how did you relate to your friends in the black community when you were living in this fancy house?
I would go over there periodically.
Did your friends ask you lots of questions about what it was like to live in this big house with a private beach?
No, they would come over there. They'd ride their bikes over there, and that first hill was like they'd ride up the hill and ride down the hill into the alleyway, into the driveway, and all that sort of stuff.
And nobody minded that they were coming over?
No, not at all. No problem.
And did it feel very much like a village, a community? Was it a tight-knit?
Yeah, it was like an extended family. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody, if you got out of line, somebody would tell your mother or straighten you out. And it was really very, very close. Everybody knew everybody. It was just impossible not to know who was whose cousin, brother, sister, whatever.
Do you think it was like that in the white community back then?
No.
It sounds very different.
No, it's very, You had the area where we were near Arlington School as a kind of enclave that a lot of the Northwestern folks live. We immediately west of there near Skokie, that was a different group of folk. South Evanston, Southeast Evanston was a different group. So they really had very little connection to organizations and politics.
Right, I mean, they were also much more spread out. They had the whole of Evanston
More
to
spread
spread out in,
out.
and you were put in one area.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that had a large Polish population that lived north of Robert Crown. And that was another large group. They were working class folk because we had 2 or 3 factories in town that a lot of working class people, worked at. And there was one guy that lived here named Eddie Buckavicki. And Eddie Buckavicki was the only white kid at Foster School.
Polish guy?
Yeah, he was a good athlete. Did you ever see Dino Robinson's book on the YMCA?
Yeah.
You'll find a picture of a basketball team on there with one white kid, and that's Eddie Buckavicki. And there were 3 movie houses: the Varsity, the Valencia, the Cornet, the Stadium, the downtown, the Valencia and the Varsity. The Varsity is down here, where Panera Bread is.
Right.
That immediately north of that was the Varsity Theater.
So Varsity, Valencia, and Stadium.
The Stadium was on Central Street. The Cornet was on Chicago and Maine. But the point I'm trying to make is that at the Varsity, they wouldn't let blacks sit on the first floor. We had to protest to get, we had to sit in the balcony. Valencia never had that policy. But in the 40s, in fact exactly 45, we started a chapter of the CORE, Committee for Racial Equality. What the hell is it? It started the sit-in movement, shall I say. Jim Farmer went to the University of Chicago. I went to a meeting in Chicago with him and a physician whose name I can't recall, who was sort of like his office was where we met. And they started the CORE, and they would do sit-ins. I don't recall what they did in Chicago, but in Evanston, there was a place called Cooley's Cupboard that wouldn't serve black. So we sat in the Cooley's Cupboard until they finally, decided to serve us. Wow. And then there was one called Robin Hood's Barn over there on Howard near the Ridge, where the physician's office are now. We sat in there, and they most of these caved in quickly.
And how old were you when you were doing these sit-ins?
About 15. The Dominion Room was, where the fisherman's place used to be.
Yeah.
That was called the Dominion Room at the time.
What was that?
That was a restaurant that was more upper class, and we never were able to break them down to serve black folks. But we sat in there too. The housing marches started in Evanston in the 60s. They were led by a woman named Alderman Mames Spencer. And as a result of that, the restrictive covenants that the whites had against Jews were broken. So Jews started moving in.
And what about the covenant against blacks?
Well, that happened too. That's when they started moving in outside of the restricted community.
Oh, these are butlers?
Yeah, these are butlers building. 1, 2, 3. And that's when he did his thing.
That's amazing. And when you drive around Evanston and you show me all these things, what does it feel like? You don't have an emotional response to it?
No, I've been, remember now.
Because you've been here all this time.
Yeah. It's looking like a scar on my head. The scar is there. I know how it got there. It's just a scar.
You don't feel a sadness for the loss of that community?
I don't feel any emotional thing about it. We fought a good fight. We did what we were supposed to do. The problem is not emotional. The problem is economic. I'm basically Marxist. I'm not a classic Marxist. The problem with Marxism and capitalism is that there always is a group, a controlling group that tends to become elitist. Of course, in U.S. they are racist too. So that's always a problem with this whole thing. So where are we now? We are at Asbury and Greenleaf.
Talk about the economics.
Now you're talking about then.
Now. And then.
Well, then you had, like here, up here on where the storage, Valley store, that was Clayton Marks. They were made tubing and pipe. And it was a huge hire of folks. That whole industrial area, we had Rust-Oleum. Several fairly large industrial companies that are not here anymore. But the point is, you had a hiring base for folks of companies that hire a lot of the people in Evanston. In fact, my great story is that this was Clayton and Marks, and I worked there when I was in high school. Me and my friend Gaylord Manson, we were making 75 cents an hour, great money. And Gaylord was caught sleeping in the back of the thing in a wheelbarrow. Got fired.
Oh no!
Oh, that was tragic.
I know that there's been like about 3,000 African Americans from Evanston have left Evanston in the last 10 years, I think.
Housing and economic, mostly housing. One of the things they did, it was zoning to keep blacks in the same area. They would have R5, R6, and everywhere else R1, R2. So this is some of the houses. A guy named Martin Bow, the Bow family, B-O-U-G-H lived there. A guy named Ike Brown. Martin Bow and Ike Brown were we had a great jazz group, and Martin was a tenor player, and Ike was a bass player.
And what did you play?
I sang in the chorus, but Martin later started working for the American Library Association, and he was head of the photocopying department, and he started counterfeiting money, and so that ended his career. And Ike Brown, who was a great bassist, big old guy, Ike died from drug overdose.
At a young age?
Yeah.
So there were people doing drugs?
Yeah. I said I can count them.
Yeah.
Ike Brown, Theron Young, Rudy Harris, the girl who married Ali, Sonji Roy, she was from Evanston, and her brother was a bad guy, meaning that he smoked cigarettes and probably marijuana. So this area that we just went by, a few blacks lived there. I can't remember all the family's name. And on Lake Street. And Garnett. When I graduated from high school, let me be clear. As I said, all I wanted to do when I was a kid was play football. That was what I wanted to do. And so, there's what talking about me being angry. I was playing semi-pro football Sundays with the grown men, right? At 12 years old. My cousin that I grew up with playing on the team, so he got me on the team. And I mean, I played, I wasn't sitting on the bench.
Yeah.
And so, when I came out as a freshman, I decided not to do it because, I didn't think it was a little bitty kid. As a sophomore, I made first string, made the first touchdown on a new field at Niles. The second game, I was demoted to second string because Agassi, one of the kids' brother, became a big star in Illinois. I'm not sure it was because of that, it was because I was black. Anyway, I made second team. I didn't quit, but it hurt my feelings.
Right.
And I'm still playing every Sunday, right? And then third year, no blacks on the varsity. All of us on the junior varsity. We had an undefeated season. were only scored upon one time. Oak Park scored 6 points before we beat them 7-6. Whereas the varsity had a very bad season. So we figured somebody's going to make the varsity. No blacks on the varsity in the senior year. We had the same kind of season with one exception. New Trier scored 21 points before we beat them. The varsity had another bad season. So we figured the tradition was that the seniors on the junior varsity can sit on the bench for the last 2 games of varsity season because, it was just tradition. And their season was longer. They wouldn't let us sit on the bench. So I was mad as hell. I mean, I was really angry. And I'm still playing semi-pro football. So when I left the high school, I was mad. I was just totally angry. And although I was in the upper whatever percent of the class, I could have went to any school I wanted to. I didn't want to go to any white school. I didn't want to go to any large black school and get involved in the in-group, out-group stuff. I went to Payne College, which was my church school, 600 students, CME school in Augusta, Georgia. And it was the best move ever made because although it was a small school, they played in a league that was fairly high class. Anyway, I made first string. I made all conference. I got some big trophy for being the best all-around athlete, all that sort of stuff. So it got my self-esteem back. It made me realize it wasn't me, it was them. And the other thing it did for me, it taught me, because then you had signs black, white, color. I learned the thing about the South is that they're not subtle. Right. And they're very direct about what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. And whereas in the North,